Try and speak right into your microphone.
Yeah.
The closer the better.
Okay.
And yeah.
Do you want to introduce us?
Yeah, I can do an introduction.
Okay.
So
I'm the president of the museum, as you know.
the museum, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Min.
I am the great niece of Lord Northcliffe.
And I'm the manager of the Northcliffe Community Resource Centre. So
Is that
welcome
close
to
enough?
our studio. Yeah, that's good. So thanks so much for being here, Ken and Min.
Thank you.
Allowing us to interview, and thanks for helping our town with the 100th celebrations. It's fantastic. So do you want to introduce yourself in a little more detail, Min, so your relationship to Alfred Harmsworth and all of that?
Well, my name is Min Stokes. I'm actually Alfred Harmsworth's great niece twice over, because one of his brothers was my great-grandfather on my mother's side, and one of his sisters was my great-grandmother on my father's side. So my parents were actually second cousins and met at a family wedding, and then they were both at Oxford, and that's how the story began, really, with us.
Okay.
So there was obviously a lot of Harmsworth sort of memorabilia around the house, and always stories, and some of the older Harmsworth people with all kinds of tales of those days, which I'm afraid I didn't take an awful lot of notice of at the time. But we were always very aware that we were part of a great sort of newspaper dynasty, but we were quite far down the track, so we weren't really part of it. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the relationship, really. So my grandmother was Dolly Harmsworth, and my other grandmother was Enid King, who was the great niece. No, sorry. Edit that. The niece of Lord Northcliffe. And there's actually even a family wedding picture where they're both bridesmaids, so it's all rather close. Yeah.
Okay. And so when did your part of the family emigrate?
I actually came out by myself. I came out when I was, after I left college, did the usual backpacking thing, and then I came back again. I spent 7 years in Jersey then, dairy farming after that, and then I came back and emigrated in 93 just by myself. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I just loved Western Australia, and ended up, by the time I came here in Jersey, I did my flying training, became a flying instructor as well. And then I thought, well, I'll either do dairy farming or flying. And I ended up flying. But I did keep my hand in with the dairy industry, working at Masters Dairy for quite a long time as well. So
you're a commercial pilot now?
Yes, I'm a flying instructor, yes.
An instructor?
Yeah, I run a school at Jandakot, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's what I do. And I'm currently studying at Murdoch University, so it's very interesting to see Beverly speak, and doing animal science degree, and hoping to maybe come full circle back into dairying in some capacity in my semi-retirement.
Okay.
So that's me, yeah.
Okay. You guys, because are you dairy farming, Ken?
My parents were dairy farmers, yeah.
Yep.
And my grandparents on both sides of the family came in 1924. So they were groups at the families, and my mother came with her family. She was only 14 years old when she came, but she was the eldest. And my grandfather came in on the Moore side in January 1924. He came by himself, and later his wife and youngest son came. Then my father came in 1927.
Okay, all in the 20s. Yeah.
And he was allocated the property that I now own and live on.
Okay. Well, someone should actually tell the story, which we all know so well, but would you tell the story of, how the town got its name?
Yes, and Min can help me out here, but what we've discovered is that we always thought that it must have been a little village near to their coastal property, and that was in Kent.
In Broadstairs in Kent.
Broadstairs, Kent, which is right on the coast. And he had a mansion, really, and a large property.
This is Alfred Harmsworth?
Yes.
Yes.
And they always walked down to the beach, which was, I just forget the name. Can you remember?
I can't quite remember, but Northcliffe isn't actually a place. It was just something he came up with. And the story is he wanted the initial N because he was often likened to Napoleon. So that's why he wanted the initial N for his...
So he was well connected enough. He got to decide what he became the lord of.
Yes, when you're made a peer, you can actually choose what name you have.
Ah.
As your...
The other interesting thing that I discovered, Min, was that when they took the track down to the beach, surrounding the beach were cliffs, those white limestone cliffs. But he went past a lighthouse, and I think it was called North Shore Lighthouse. Mm-hmm. And the word cliff with an E on the end was a very old English family name, and it was given to people that live near cliffs or high riverbanks. So my theory is that he would have thought, I'll be Lord Northcliffe.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of Napoleon in the name of Northcliffe.
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
Yes. So, but I have to give credit to my sister Teresa here, who is the great family historian and who's discovers a lot of these things as well. You may have read the book The Chief that recently came out about him a couple of years ago, and she actually did quite a lot of research towards that as well.
A book about Alfred.
The latest biography of him. There's been a few, but this is the latest one.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we have that at the museum. So you can borrow it.
Yeah, no, I'd love to.
It's not quite such heavy going as some of the earlier ones.
Right.
So if I can just say how I discovered, I was living here and I looked on a map and I saw there was a place called Northcliffe. And I thought, that's funny because that's a funny spelling for it. And none of our family knew anything about this town.
Oh, really?
Nobody in our family knew that there was a town named after him.
Oh, well, that answers one of my questions.
Okay.
Yeah, because I wonder if the
preempted you,
extended family sort of had knowledge of it.
Possibly. It is a huge, huge, huge family. I mean, every generation had about 10 children. So, yeah.
Right.
So there are, I think my grandmother had something like 50 first cousins or something like that. It's just
Okay.
enormous. So it is possible.
Do you have like Harmsworth family gatherings?
Not really, no. I think we're sort of fairly distant now, sort of down the track.
Yeah,
so
I guess the family gets
there.
too large eventually.
I do remember some family weddings when I was very young with Harmsworth kind of dotted around, and they were all
Okay.
very terrifying. I remember that. And there were terrifying family portraits in our house as well that used to be scared to walk past when you were
Yeah, well, in my research I discovered, that Harmsworth is the chairman of the Daily Mail even today, which
Yes,
blew
that's
my mind.
I think he's my fourth cousin or something. My sister would know. Jonathan Rothermere, yes. He's
Yep.
the current chairman.
Yeah, and
So-
Lord Northcliffe, his house or his country house or beach house was a mansion, and it was called after a tree. What was that mean?
Elmwood, I believe.
Elmwood, yeah.
And the story is he didn't want to have that as his peerage name because that's what coffins are made of.
Right.
So he thought it was a bit moribund, I think, and because a lot of people just take the name of the place where they live or the name of their house or something like that. And,
Yeah.
yeah, he didn't want Elmwood because that's what coffins are made of.
Yeah, and I've looked at it on Google Earth, and now the estate is divided into three. One of them is his Elmwood house, and then the second one is named Northcliffe, and the third one is called Home Oak. Yep.
I was going to ask you, so the cause of group settlement was based on a pretty worthy point of view, I think, and like a problem-solving mindset. Are there any other causes sort of that are, of that the family has championed over the years?
Aviation, absolutely. Northcliffe was a great proponent of aviation, and he was always saying that, when they were talking about war and the Navy and everything, they were saying it's all going to be pointless because when people get aeroplanes, they're going to use them for fighting and bombing, and he was well ahead of his time. As you may know, he put up a £1,000 prize for the first person to fly across the English Channel, which was Louis Blériot. And my grandmother was there when he landed. She used to tell that story. That's a lot of money in those days. So it wasn't a sponsorship. They had to actually do it, and then they would get the money, and he would get the exclusive on their story, of course. That was the other side of it.
Okay.
And the other famous ones, of course, was Alcock and Brown, the first ones to cross the Atlantic, and Amy Johnson, who, of course, was the first person to fly solo to Australia, and she got £10,000 prize from Lord Northcliffe for that. Yeah,
Right.
So he was always very much pioneering, saying aviation and, encouraging it and doing everything he could to, make people more interested in it. So,
Yep.
And then I became a pilot, and ironically, I did actually win a scholarship, which was a Amy Johnson scholarship, and it turned out that he'd started the scholarship like years and years before. So I didn't even know that when I when I went for it.
Okay.
So that was quite a coincidence. But, so that was
a flight school scholarship.
It was, yes, it was, yeah. And I won that back in England, the Amy Johnson Memorial Scholarship, which was actually started by him. And what was the other thing I was going to say? He also predicted, I think about over 100 years ago, that there would one day be non-stop flights between England and Australia. And everyone said that's never going to happen. It was almost exactly 100 years later, Perth to Heathrow direct flights started.
Oh, okay.
So he was way ahead of his time. Everything to do with aviation, yes.
They can do that without refuelling?
Yeah, I've done it a few times now.
Okay.
It's a great way to get there. You don't have to stop and hang around in Singapore or somewhere else. You can just get on the plane and get off, and you're in England.
Yeah, that would be.
And that's everyone said that's never going to happen.
20 hours. 19.
It's about 16 or 17. It can it can vary a little bit, but it's doable, and it's not bad. You just kind of sit there and go till you get there. Yeah,
Okay.
watch some good movies, and so that's the main thing I think that interests me about him is that aviation connection for sure. Yeah. And then there's all the stories about how he invented the tabloid and why it was called the tabloid and all that sort of thing, which are actually in the book The Chief, I believe.
Oh, why is it called the tabloid?
Well, there used to be, for medication, you had a tablet, and if it was small, it was called a tabloid. And of course, he had in those days, newspapers were enormous broadsheets, and they were difficult to read. So he thought, we'll just fold them in half, and make them half the size. So half the size of a tablet is a tabloid. There you go. That's how they got called tabloids.
Is there some metaphor about drugging the masses there?
Well, they might well be, because he was also in charge of propaganda, I think, for the government at some point.
Yeah, war propaganda during, would it be the First World War, obviously?
Because there was he had such a huge reach, because he had all these other ideas and things like the Daily Mirror, I'm told, was started because he thought, well, what do women like looking at? They like looking in the mirror, so he called it the Mirror. And it was originally a sort of women's magazine and things like that. He was just way ahead of his time and just kind of read the room really well, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was a couple of things there. And the story as it actually began, they were so poor, the Harmsworth family, that I think his father was a lawyer but hadn't been terribly successful. I could be wrong there, so forgive me, relatives, I've got that wrong. But they actually had to use newspapers for blankets at one point because they were so poor. And he thought, right, one day I'm going to own one of these newspapers. And he just worked and worked and worked. Took all the risks.
It's amazing starting a newspaper.
He was a very innovative man. And there's an interesting connection as well, because Rupert Murdoch's family were sort of obviously protégés of his. And then we've got Beverly there, who was the Vice-Chancellor of Murdoch University, which was another member of the same family, and all that sort of thing. So the connections just... there's so many. It's lovely.
Yeah, I've been thinking a bit about the Rupert Murdoch connections for sure.
Yeah. So I think it was Sir Walter Murdoch from the university who was, I think, Rupert Murdoch's great uncle or something like that. But he was, the other Murdochs, the Rupert Murdoch side, were great, sort of protégés of Lord Northcliffe. So
Okay.
So it goes round and round, doesn't it? Yeah.
So now, are you the first person from the Harmsworth family who's come to Northcliffe?
Well, when I had my cousin coming out, my cousin Rosalind. We decided, let's go on a road trip and let's go and find this place in Northcliffe. So we got in the car and we drove down to Northcliffe and we went to the museum, and it's Carol, isn't it? Was there?
No, Dennis.
Who's the lady who's selling the badges today?
Carol.
I'm pretty sure she was there. No, this is like 25 plus
25 years ago.
And we went in there and we had a chat to her and said, we're Lord Northcliffe's great nieces and all this sort of thing. And we did find some other stuff in the museum that another Harmsworth family member, I think Edward, had contributed.
Is it Vivian or sounds
could be a Vivian. My middle name is Vivian because it's one of the family names. Possibly, yeah. So we had a bit of a look around and were fascinated by it. And I always thought, I'll come back soon. My sister just came to visit, so it was only 25 years later we came back down and went to the museum, and that's how we kind of got in touch with Ken.
That was probably Yvonne Cash, actually, 25 years ago.
It would have been.
As the president.
Yeah, potentially, but also as whoever would be in the museum. I think Carol didn't get involved with the museum until about 15 years ago. So.
Okay, she looked familiar, but it could have been, but there was definitely a lady there who was very helpful. And then when we came back, obviously the museum's grown and absolutely loved it. My sister's very artistic, so she loved all the intricate stuff that the ladies did and made, and the creativity of the people here was stunning. I'm not creative at all. I'm very much more a scientist, but she just absolutely loved that side of it.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Did you come down by yourself this time, or?
Today, yes, I did.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Just myself, but every time a family member comes, we'll definitely come down here. But I'd like to come down more often. We have been looking at some land here, possibly to retire.
If I had a town named after me, I'd be down there often.
It's named after me, but yeah.
Try and get free drinks at the pub.
not just the name, it's just such a lovely part of the world, and and I'm fascinated by the history of the dairy farming here as well. So
Yeah. And people do ask, how come Northcliffe's got an E on the end?
Yeah, that never struck me as a question before.
But I think my answer is correct, even though I'm putting words into...
So it was
Lord.
from...
it was an old English family name of people who lived near
Cliffs.
would have an E on the end.
Yeah.
Things were spelt differently in those days. There'd be, wasn't necessarily just one way of spelling things.
So he was just doing an association on the spot at his beach house to come up with a Lord title.
Yeah, and as Min said, he wanted an N linked to Napoleon.
Because a lot of people called him the Napoleon of Fleet Street. That was one of his nicknames. So the
Yeah.
N. And
Plus-
he often signed things
yeah.
with just an N. So
Plus the cliffs, plus he went past a lighthouse
yeah.
and called
What's-
North Shore or something like that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
And
they put
as
them
far
all
as I'm
together.
aware, the only other Northcliffe is in Canada.
No, there isn't a Northcliffe in Canada, I don't think.
No,
Unless you've found one.
There's a Northcliffe in... Is it the Gold Coast or...
Yeah, there is. Actually, it's a surf club on the Gold Coast.
That's right, because Abe's got a hat from there.
Yeah.
But I believe I've Googled Northcliffe a few times and sometimes it'll come up with I thought it was somewhere in Canada. But
Yeah. There are names of Northcliffe around Bedstay. Broadstairs. Is it?
Broadstairs is in England
Yeah.
where his main house was, yeah. He had obviously a place in London as well.
Yep.
So-
Have they got E's, I wonder?
Yes, I have. They're
Okay.
obviously named after him. I'll have to check the Canada one.
Yeah, I hadn't heard about that, but it's very possible. His reach was far and wide.
It was. Yeah.
And the other thing, of course, was he got very sick actually while he was touring, including a tour of Australia, which was actually the undoing of him, which was sad. He actually died of infectious endocarditis, which they reckon he caught on his tour, which is a infected heart valve, which would be very treatable nowadays. But
Yep. Did I read there was something to do with a war experience that he had that, or?
I'm not sure about that. I think
Okay.
it was just unlucky.
Yep.
But it makes people go a bit psycho, I think. And he became very erratic, let's say. And at one point he was lucid enough and said, "They say Lord Northcliffe is going mad. Send a reporter to do a story on it." Typical of him. It's one of the last things,
Yeah.
But yeah, these days would be treated with a heart operation and some
Oh, of
antibiotics,
course.
But
Yeah.
sadly, his funeral was massive. Apparently, there was just miles and miles of the streets of London lined with people to watch him go by. He was a very popular character in those days. Yeah.
So did you say he was in Australia when he died, or?
He was doing a tour around the world, and I think he never got to Western Australia,
No.
and obviously he died before this town was named, but I think he went to Sydney and Melbourne, and
Yes.
he got ill. And there's actually a picture I saw in the museum, that
Yeah.
my sister Felicity and I, of him on a ship at that
Yeah,
time,
that's correct.
looking really thin, because he was actually quite a sturdy, as we all are in our family, character, and he just looked shocking. I'd never seen that picture before. Yeah, but he
So
obviously became
if
very
he,
ill.
died before the town was named. Who named the town?
I don't know. Ken would probably know.
Yeah,
that.
the
West
Premier
Australian
of
government, yeah.
WA,
Oh yes.
James Mitchell,
That's
who
right.
was advocate of the group settlement scheme. So, and
And a fan of Northcliffe.
Well, what Northcliffe did
Well,
was to promote it in his newspapers and
Yeah.
say, go to Australia and start a new life and go dairy farming, and it's all going to be easy. But I think when it didn't become as easy, I think he also that as far as I know, and I could be wrong here, the family did donate money towards the scheme as well. So,
Yeah.
but he was a great one for, perhaps in the bit of the vein of Cecil Rhodes, which is very unpopular now,
Yeah.
of kind of spreading the British kind of way of life around the world, and that was what kind of drove him, I think, partly. But he was a philanthropist anyway. But he certainly never knew that this town was named after him, which is
and perhaps a solution to political problems back in Britain too, to get unemployed people, numbers of unemployed people down, and
well, yes, it was all. Yeah, I mean, the world was a very different place then. It's hard to believe it was only 100 years ago.
But after World War One, Britain was quite prosperous for a while, and that's when it was called the Roaring 20s, sorry.
20s, yeah.
Yeah, but by the mid-20s, depression had started.
Yeah, and I think people would sort of get out to Australia and get ahead before it hits, because he was always very able to predict that things like that were going to happen. So,
the depression was well predicted by some people.
I think, people with who'd been that successful wouldn't be that successful if they couldn't see what was coming, I suppose. I'm speculating here, but yes, I think. But the main thing was he just wanted, people to. If he wanted people to colonise, that wasn't colonising exactly, but to develop places, he wanted them to do it in the British kind of way.
Places. Yep.
Yeah. So of course now things are very different, and the thought of cutting down the trees and everything, would probably be looked at very differently. But
it's banned.
Yes, it's banned now, and how much has changed in that time? But I think here we are, and we make the best of what has been done, and I think what Beverly was saying and the other ladies has really brought that home as well, because I think the strength of the women that were unsung heroes of all of this is amazing. And talking of strong women, I think Northcliffe's mother was an incredibly strong lady, so I think that that was quite a thing as well.
What was her name?
Her name was Geraldine Harmsworth, and she was, he had to, I think he wrote to her like every day. She needed a report on what was going on. So there was very much a lot of strong women in the Harmsworth family too. Yeah, so.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's a little bit, again, I always like to see circles kind of closing. And that's
my mum, despite the hardship, she never thought badly of the group settlement scheme. When she came here, she thought it was a big adventure, being a 14-year-old. But she's right. Now Northcliffe's, even though we're a small town, we're a productive agricultural area.
And some of the problems they encountered were not able to be anticipated, were they? Like the nutrient deficiency of the soil.
Yeah, they didn't understand the soil.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And of
so
course
it's turned out good.
The effect of cutting down trees on the water table and salination.
But at the same time, the idea of providing permanent housing opportunities for financially disadvantaged people in return for some sort of responsible activity, that's going to be perennial and come back again. I mean, the housing debate in Australia, you can see that those sorts of ideas could easily come up again. Obviously it'll look quite different to this, but
people certainly earned their houses here, didn't they? They didn't come easy, and then as a result appreciate things. And you have a lovely reunion like this where, it's all sort of 100 years later and there's still a massive community that seem to be very close from what I can see, people that are very connected. And, a lot of people were saying, they'd been at school together and all this sort of thing, lovely to see.
It's an unusual town, Northcliffe, in my experience of Australian country towns.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
A lot of volunteer groups.
There certainly is that, yes.
Yeah.
You've probably been on a good proportion of them, Ken.
Yeah, this building here, I was the president to build it and, of course, raise the money.
Yeah, we're incredibly fortunate to have that happen when it did, this building. Just have to look at how Pemberton, neighbouring towns, struggled so much to get an equivalent facility.
And I put my foot down to have the art gallery in the building. Some people wanted it to be used for other things, and that certainly paid off. It's a brilliant gallery. And you've been on the sculpture trail, haven't you?
Not yet, no.
Oh, no.
That's something to look forward to.
Yeah.
No, not yet.
You will do.
Yes, I hope so. I wonder if that's the way things just get done here is a legacy of the people that first came out, how you don't just wait for someone else to do it, you just roll your sleeves up and get the job
Exactly.
done.
I mean, that must be true. We're interviewing people all weekend for this 100th weekend, and a lot of them grew up during group settlement, and they're the same people who founded and now often are still volunteers on some of these local committees that have made all this happen. And then there's a new generation, including myself, who volunteer on a bunch of committees who have sort of picked up the reins from those people. So it's definitely some continuous kind of cycle going back to that group settlement.
That's lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, whatever happened then that gave people that self-help, I guess. Self-help
they had
ethos.
to, or they didn't survive.
Yes. Yes.
If you want an ambulance service and a
Fire brigade and
service.
and a school and a shop and
yeah.
now, is there anything else you need to?
No, Min's done a brilliant job talking about Lord Northcliffe.
As I've said, disclaimer, I'm not 100% on everything. My sister Teresa is a true historian, so if I have got any facts wrong, I do apologise. She would always be able to correct them, and you've been in touch with her, Ken.
Sounds very good to me.
She was actually the one who discovered that his so-called children weren't actually related at all, because he had... him and his wife never had children, but he had a mistress and there were 3 children, and she passed them off as his, but DNA testing came along and my sister got a few people to DNA test, and because we're doubly his great niece, me and my sisters, we were the best candidates for it, and turns out all those children came from orphanages. They were no relation at all. So there's I believe that is in the chief. Yeah, so that was my sister Teresa that managed to that found that out, because she wanted to do the DNA testing, and they tested mum and dad as well, because obviously as they were both descended from the same family, and that as a result they were able to prove that they were not his children at all. So that was quite interesting. Although there was a child that I believe he fathered with a housemaid when he was about 16, which is very scandalous, and who he did give a job to at the newspaper, and wasn't kind of cast aside, but was kept a little bit quiet because it was terribly naughty in those days.
Yeah.
But I don't believe there were any descendants from that line, so he had no actual direct descendants at all.
Wow.
Yeah.
Family history books can be pretty colourful. Someone never puts it all together.
It is quite a family, I can tell you.
I guess it's a series of books now, as you said. Like there's some
yeah.
books being published already. But
Well, luckily, my sister's a very good genealogist, and she's got everything there. She can answer most questions about the family very quickly. Yeah, and
Where does she live?
she lives at the moment. She's living with mum in a little village called Abbottstown in Hampshire. So she does spend some time in London, but mum's 90. I won't say it. I shouldn't say it on the right. Mum's getting on a bit now, and Teresa helps look after her, and so she spends a lot of time there with her. Yeah, and mum's a great archivist as well, and historian. She actually did history at Oxford, so she's very much into all that. And so there could be more information about the whole family. Who knows? That they just need to write it down. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming and talking to us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Graham.
Oh, good.